Hey guys, tonight we're rediving into a story that feels like it came straight out of one of those late night soap operas your aunt binge watches. Except this one is from my own life. Imagine this. I'm standing in the middle of my childhood home, the air thick with the smell of polished wood and bitter arguments, while my siblings are circling around me like vultures who just spotted their favorite prey. The topic: my father's inheritance. The atmosphere: well, let's just say if words were knives, I wouldn't have made it out alive. You probably wouldn't survive sitting in that room either. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're retuning in from and what time it is right now. I am always curious who's listening to me at 3 in the morning halfway across the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. I still remember that night vividly. The shouting, the banging of fists against the table, the way my eldest brother's eyes glimmered with a kind of hunger that wasn't for food but for control. I had walked into that room thinking I'd at least have a voice in how things were divided. After all, we all grew up under the same leaky roof, shared the same bowl of watery soup, laughed at the same dumb TV commercials. But the moment I opened my mouth, the air froze. My sister sneered, my brother scoffed, and someone even muttered that I was a burden. That word still stings, even now. Burden. It rolled off their tongues like it had been rehearsed, like they'd been saving it up for years just to use it against me. If life were a courtroom drama, this was the scene where the prosecutor dramatically slams down a stack of damning evidence. Except the evidence was just me. I tried to defend myself, to remind them of the nights I'd stayed up with Mom when she was sick, the hours I spent working part-time jobs so the family could pay bills. But you know how it is when people have already made up their minds. Your words might as well be raindrops on a windshield, noticeable for a second, then swept away without a trace. The decision came down swiftly, like a judge reading a sentence. I was to leave. No share. No discussion, no space to linger. Just out. My belongings were shoved into a bag: some clothes, a few books, and, embarrassingly enough, a broken hairdryer I thought I might fix someday. Standing on the doorstep, the heavy wooden door slammed behind me with the finality of a prison gate. The night outside was unusually quiet, as if the neighborhood itself didn't dare to make a sound in the wake of my exile. The streetlight above flickered weakly, like it was deciding whether I was worth illuminating. My shoes scuffed against the pavement as I walked, and every step echoed louder than it should have. It wasn't just walking away from a house, it was walking away from the idea of belonging. And here's the funny part: well, funny if you've got a taste for dark comedy. As I dragged my bag down the street, I caught myself thinking about that broken hairdryer. Of all the things I could have saved, why that? Imagine explaining that to a historian. Yes, scholars. This tragic figure carried nothing but a busted appliance into his exile. Some historians would still argue whether it was symbolic of resilience or just poor decision-making. I wish I could tell you I had a plan, that I strode into the night with some secret savings or a hidden benefactor waiting, but no, what I had was a plastic bag cutting into my palm, a fading sense of dignity, and the gnawing realization that I was officially homeless. The first few steps away from the house felt like stepping into another dimension. The familiar world, the one with family dinners, inside jokes, and Sunday mornings spent doing absolutely nothing, was behind me. Ahead was an expanse of uncertainty, as if the road itself was smirking at me, whispering, "Good luck, champ." It was the night of my exile, the moment my life cracked open and spilled me into the streets. And I didn't know it then, but this was just the beginning of a long, absurd, painful, and eventually triumphant journey. One that would take me from sleeping on sidewalks to building something far larger than I could have ever imagined. But for now, I was just one guy, walking into the dark, trying not to trip over a loose cobblestone. The first night on the street is always the longest. At least, that's what I tell myself now, looking back. Back then, though, I wasn't thinking in poetic one-liners. I was thinking about how hard the concrete felt against my back, and how every gust of wind felt like a personal attack. I found myself curling up on the corner near a half-lit convenience store, pretending the hum of the vending machine beside me was some kind of lullaby. Spoiler, it wasn't. The concrete pressed into my bones like it had a personal vendetta. My bag doubled as a pillow, which is a generous way of saying that I shoved it under my head and tried not to think about how uncomfortable it was. The broken hairdryer, bless its useless soul, dug into my neck with the persistence of a mosquito that refuses to leave. If you've ever tried sleeping with a hard object stabbing you, you'll know it doesn't exactly inspire sweet dreams. What I noticed most, though, was the sound. Cities never truly sleep, and neither do their streets. Every 15 minutes, a motorbike coughed down the road, headlights sweeping over me like a spotlight exposing a criminal. A stray dog barked at nothing, then at me, then at nothing again. Somewhere in the distance, a couple was arguing loudly, passionately, as if the fate of the world hinged on whether or not someone forgot to buy eggs. Historians would still argue whether humans or pigeons make the more consistent nighttime noise. Honestly, after that week, I'd vote pigeons. At least they don't rev their engines at 2 a.m. I wrapped my jacket tighter, though jacket is a generous word. It was thin, frayed at the sleeves, and smelled faintly of detergent mixed with street dust. Funny how smell works, it can yank you right out of your misery for a split second. I caught the faintest whiff of home, the laundry room I'd left behind, and suddenly I was back in a world where I wasn't cold, wasn't hungry, wasn't disposable. That illusion shattered the moment my stomach growled. Hunger doesn't care about your nostalgia. It gnaws at you like an impatient landlord pounding on the door, demanding rent you don't have. I rummaged through my bag and found exactly one half-eaten granola bar, melted slightly from the heat of the day. It wasn't much, but I savored every crumb like it was a 5-star meal. Funny how the absence of comfort turns the simplest things into luxury. I didn't sleep much that night, maybe 20 minutes at a time, before a noise or a shiver yanked me back to consciousness. My mind kept circling back to the house, the slammed door, the sneers. The way my siblings looked at me as if tossing me out was as simple as throwing out yesterday's trash. That image stuck like a bad screensaver, looping endlessly. Morning didn't bring relief, just a different kind of struggle. The concrete under me warmed as the sun rose, and I realized I'd better move before someone came out and told me to get lost. People walking by pretended not to see me, which, to be fair, was better than the ones who stared a little too long. I caught sight of myself in the reflection of a store window dish. Tired, eyes shadowed, and thought, well, there's a poster child for rock bottom. But rock bottom has its quirks. For instance, you learn that benches in small parks are slightly kinder to your spine than sidewalks. You learn that gas stations sometimes leave hot water taps running, and that if you hover long enough without looking suspicious harder than it sounds, you can warm your hands. And you learn that the city at dawn has a strange beauty, quiet streets, golden light bouncing off tall windows, as if the world itself forgets to be cruel for half an hour. Of course, reality always finds a way to slap you back. By noon, the heat pressed down like a heavy blanket, and I realized sleeping outdoors wasn't just uncomfortable, it was unsustainable. I needed something, anything, to anchor myself. A job, a purpose, a corner of stability in the chaos. That night, lying on a different sidewalk, upgraded location, near a bakery, at least it smelled good, I told myself this couldn't be permanent. It was survival, sure, but it couldn't be forever. My body was already protesting, my mind fraying at the edges. Something had to give. And yet, despite the exhaustion, I caught myself chuckling at the absurdity of it all. Here I was, the sibling deemed unworthy of inheritance, now becoming an unwilling expert in urban camping. If there were a degree for that, I'd probably graduate with honors. Some historians might even argue that the true skill of humanity isn't invention or culture, it's simply adapting, even when adaptation looks ridiculous. That laugh, small as it was, kept me warm enough to drift into another restless half-sleep. And just like that, one more night passed. By the third night, I had mastered the art of pretending sidewalks were mattresses. Not comfortable ones, more like those ultra-budget motel mattresses that creak every time you breathe, but still, I told myself it was progress. The hunger, however, was harder to negotiate with. My stomach had officially started to sound like an old radiator in a haunted house. If someone had walked by, they probably would have assumed I was harboring a small, growling dog inside me. I realized quickly that food wasn't just survival, it was morale. Without it, even your thoughts turn brittle. That morning, I scavenged coins from the deepest corners of my bag and pockets, the kind of lint-coated treasure hunt that archaeologists would debate the cultural significance of. In total, a few crumpled bills and coins, barely enough for a bowl of plain rice at the street vendor's stall. I can still picture that vendor. Old man, crooked glasses, hands that moved with the speed of someone who'd been ladling soup for decades. He barely looked at me when I handed over the money, but when he set down that bowl, steaming and fragrant, I swear it was like he was serving me the crown jewels. The first bite, soft rice, salty fish sauce, hit me harder than any fancy meal ever could. Hunger has a way of making everything taste like it was cooked by angels. But bowls of rice don't magically appear without money. And that's when it dawned on me. I needed to work, any work, the kind that people looked past, the jobs nobody wanted. Within days, I was hauling boxes at the market, scrubbing dishes in a greasy back kitchen, sweeping floors that somehow never stayed clean. Odd jobs became my new curriculum, each shift a crash course in humility and endurance. There was something grounding about it, though. I wasn't proud, exactly, but I wasn't invisible anymore either. Carrying crates of vegetables at dawn, I'd watch the city wake up, vendors shouting prices, motorbikes weaving like chaos on wheels, the smell of fresh bread competing with exhaust fumes. In those moments, I wasn't the outcast brother. I was just another pair of hands, keeping the city moving. The pay, let's just say it wasn't enough to buy more than instant noodles and the occasional banana. Still, it was better than starving. And you'd be amazed at how creative hunger makes you. I learned to stretch one pack of noodles into 2 meals by adding hot water, until it looked like a sad soup. I once convinced myself that licking the seasoning packet directly was cuisine innovation. Historians would probably debate whether that counts as genius or desperation. Sleep was a different challenge. Concrete was still my default bed, but now my exhaustion carried me through the night. I'd collapse after each job, my muscles buzzing with aches I didn't know existed. One evening, after scrubbing plates until my fingers wrinkled, I fell asleep leaning against a wall behind the restaurant. The sound of clattering dishes faded into the kind of dreamless void only bone-deep fatigue can deliver. And yet, in the middle of all that, something shifted. I started noticing people. The security guard who quietly let me nap near his booth without shooing me away. The fruit seller who, once in a while, slipped me an overripe banana with a conspiratorial wink. Even the stray dog that hovered near my corner at night felt like an odd sort of companion, as if we were 2 soldiers drafted into the same strange war. When I learned survival wasn't just about scraping by, it was about these tiny acts of grace that reminded me I wasn't entirely alone. Of course, not every moment was uplifting. There were mornings I woke with ants crawling across my arm, or days when a sudden downpour soaked me so thoroughly, I might as well have jumped into a swimming pool fully clothed. I'd sit there, dripping, thinking, well, at least laundry's free this way. That kind of gallows humor kept me sane. But even in the worst moments, a stubborn ember stayed lit inside me, some half-crazy belief that I wasn't meant to rot on the margins forever. Every dish I scrubbed, every box I carried, whispered the same thought. This isn't permanent. One day, somehow, this will just be a chapter, not the whole book. And maybe, just maybe, the same family who'd thrown me out would one day realize the irony of it all. It's strange how survival routines dull the edges of misery. By the time I'd settled into my carousel of odd jobs, boxes, dishes, floors, I started believing this was just how life worked now. Wake up on concrete, shuffle through labor, collapse somewhere new. But fate, in its bizarre sense of timing, decided to toss me a curveball in the form of a stranger. I was lugging crates of wilted cabbages across the market one morning, when a man in a clean, pressed shirt stopped me. At first, I assumed he was going to complain that I was blocking his way because, honestly, my cabbages and I weren't exactly glamorous. Instead, he asked, "You looking for steady work?" Now, Here's the thing. When you've been eating instant noodles flavored mostly with disappointment, any mention of steady feels like someone offering you a golden ticket. But I was cautious. My life up until that point had been a highlight reel of disappointments. Still, I nodded. He told me about a small workshop he ran repairing appliances, patching up electronics, odd mechanical tasks. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real work. And so, just like that, I found myself inside his workshop the next day. The place smelled of soda, oil, and old dust, a holy trinity of fix-it shops. Shelves stacked high with radios, fans, microwaves, all waiting for resurrection. It reminded me, oddly, of that broken hairdryer I'd dragged with me from home. Maybe this was the universe's twisted joke. You carried junk, so here's a junkyard career. Still, the work was honest. I swept floors, organized tools, and watched him repair circuit boards with the precision of a surgeon. When he realized I had quick hands and an eagerness to learn, he started letting me try simple fixes, tightening screws, replacing wires, testing batteries. And here's the wild part. I was good at it. Who knew being tossed out with nothing could lead me to discovering I had a knack for breathing life back into dead gadgets? For the first time in weeks, I felt the edges of stability creeping back. My pay was small but regular. I had a roof over my head, albeit the workshop's dusty back corner where I laid out a thin mattress. To me, it might as well have been a 5-star suite. No barking dogs, no midnight engines, no ants holding raves on my arms. Just quiet, punctuated by the occasional buzz of a fly trapped against the window. The workshop became my sanctuary. Days blurred into a rhythm. Repairing, cleaning, learning. Nights were a little softer now. I could read by a dim bulb, eat leftover rice without counting every grain. Hunger no longer clawed at me like a feral cat. My boss even cracked jokes, dry ones, like telling me that a toaster was smarter than I was when I fumbled with wires. I laughed, even though part of me wondered if he was serious. Historians would probably still debate whether humor in small workshops is a sign of camaraderie, or a coping mechanism for inhaling too much solder smoke. I'd say it was both. What stuck with me most, though, was the unexpected dignity of it all. Customers would come in with broken things, eyes hopeful, and leave smiling when the gadget worked again. There was a strange, quiet power in being the person who could make that happen. I wasn't invisible anymore. My hands weren't just for hauling boxes, they were for creating function out of failure. And the irony wasn't lost on me. My family had called me a burden, yet here I was, turning broken burdens into second chances. Each fixed fan, each humming radio, whispered to me, maybe you're not so useless after all. Of course, I wasn't magically saved. The back corner was still cold, the meals were still simple, and the world was still unforgiving. But compared to the sidewalks, this was paradise. I no longer measured my worth by how many hours I could endure. Hunger, I measured it by how many machines I could coax back to life. One evening, as I leaned back against the workbench, covered in grease, I thought, maybe this is the first real step. Maybe exile wasn't the end of my story, but the awkward, painful prologue to something bigger. And for the first time since being thrown out, I didn't feel like laughing at the absurdity. I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could believe in it. There's a certain luxury in routine, even if the routine isn't glamorous. Waking up in the dusty back corner of the workshop, brushing my teeth with tap water that tasted faintly of rust, eating the same bowl of leftover rice, it all started to feel like stability. After weeks of wandering, the very act of knowing where I'd sleep each night felt almost decadent. If hotels advertised guaranteed lack of ants in your bed, I'd have paid extra. The days stretched long, filled with a whir of fans, the faint tick of screwdrivers, and the occasional spark that reminded me electricity doesn't forgive mistakes. My hands toughened, calloused by handling wires and sharp edges, and slowly a rhythm grew between me and the machines. Fixing them felt like learning another language, one where squeaks and flickers were the alphabet, and patience was the grammar. My boss, whose name was Mr. Tuan, wasn't the warmest man alive, but he wasn't cruel either. He had the kind of gruff exterior you expect from someone who has been elbow-deep in microwaves for 20 years. Still, every now and then, he'd mutter a good work under his breath. I learned quickly that was high praise in his world, basically the equivalent of being knighted. And with every little repair, something in me shifted. I started keeping small envelopes of my pay under my mattress. Nothing dramatic, just a few crumpled bills here and there. But for someone who had nothing, watching that pile slowly grow felt like catching raindrops in a desert. One afternoon, I walked past a bakery after work. The smell of fresh bread floated out like it was taunting me. On impulse, I walked in and bought the smallest roll they had still warm, the crust crackling under my fingers. I sat outside, tore it in half, and savored it as though it were a feast. For the first time since my exile, I ate something not because I needed it, but because I wanted it. And that small distinction made me feel human again. There were still rough edges, of course. The workshop roof leaked when it rained, dripping cold water onto my thin mattress. The neighborhood was loud, with motorbikes growling past at all hours, and Mr. Tuon's radio only played the same 3 songs over and over, until I swore I'd hear them in my dreams. Historians, I'm convinced, would argue whether that kind of repetition strengthens character or just slowly drives you mad. But even in the imperfections, there was a sweetness. I had colleagues, well, okay, one grumpy boss and a stray cat that wandered in sometimes. I had purpose, and I had those envelopes of cash, whispering to me that maybe I could start thinking about something beyond day-to-day survival. I remember one evening in particular, I was closing up the shop, sweeping the floor, when I caught my reflection in the dusty window. Same messy hair, same tired eyes, but something was different. My shoulders weren't slumped the same way. I looked steadier, like someone who belonged, even if it was just in a cluttered workshop filled with half-dead appliances. That night, lying on my mattress, I didn't just think about surviving the next day. I started to wonder about what came after. Was I really destined to spend my life fixing other people's broken gadgets? Or was this just a stepping stone? The thought felt dangerous, almost greedy, but once it lodged in my head, it wouldn't leave. And so, while I kept working, sweeping, repairing, I also started dreaming, tentatively at first, like dipping a toe into cold water. Then bolder, bigger, I began to imagine a life where I was just scraping by but building something of my own. For now, though, I tucked the dream away, like those envelopes of cash. Safe, hidden, waiting for the right time. Dreams are a dangerous luxury when you've barely gotten back on your feet. They sneak in when you least expect it, while scrubbing grease off your hands, or staring at the ceiling as rainwater drips onto your mattress. At first, I tried to shove them away. Be practical, I told myself. Don't waste time fantasizing about castles when you can barely afford bread. But like an itch you can't scratch, the thought kept returning. Maybe I was capable of more. I'd watch customers walk in with their busted appliances, people who own shops, restaurants, homes filled with gadgets, and I couldn't help but wonder how different their lives must be. They worried about warranties and upgrades, while I was still counting coins to stretch a bowl of noodles. The contrast gnawed at me, and yet, instead of crushing me, it sparked something. Ambition, I guess, or stubbornness. One evening, after fixing a particularly stubborn radio that whined louder than a mosquito at midnight, Mr. Tuon gave me a rare grin. "You've got a knack for this," he said. Just that one sentence, simple, gruff, almost tossed away. But to me, it felt like fuel poured on a flickering flame. That night, lying on my lumpy mattress, I let my mind wander. What if I could run my own shop someday? Not just fixing other people's junk, but creating something. A place where people came because they trusted me, not because I was just another pair of hands. The thought scared me like staring at a mountain from the bottom, but it also thrilled me. Of course, my practical side chimed in with sarcasm. Sure, genius. You've got a mattress that smells like mildew and a hairdryer that doesn't even work. Let's build an empire. I laughed out loud at myself, which probably worried the stray cat curled at my feet. Historians would still argue whether humor in desperation is resilience or plain delusion. I'd argue it's both. But still, ambition had cracked the door open, and I couldn't slam it shut anymore. I started saving more deliberately. Instead of buying the occasional bread roll or treating myself to an extra egg in my noodles, I funneled almost every bill into my envelopes. I began reading anything I could get my hands on: old manuals, dog-eared magazines left behind by customers, even advertisements. They all seemed to whisper lessons about repair, business, or the way people valued things. Oddly enough, the broken hairdryer I'd dragged from home became my nightly practice project. I'd tinker with it after hours, trying new techniques I'd picked up during the day. It remained stubbornly dead, mocking me with its silence. But I refused to give up. It became a symbol: if I could fix this, maybe I could fix my whole life. Meanwhile, I noticed something subtle changing in me. When customers came in, I wasn't just the boy sweeping floors anymore. I started answering their questions, explaining repairs, offering small advice. Some even complimented my patience. Patience, the same guy who once nearly cried over burnt instant noodles, was now teaching people how to care for their fans. One afternoon, a woman brought in her old sewing machine. "No one wants to bother fixing these anymore," she sighed, but it was my mother's. I worked on it for hours, carefully cleaning gears and rethreading wires until the needle finally hummed smoothly. When she tried it, her eyes watered, and she pressed my hands as if I'd given her back a piece of her family. That moment lingered. It wasn't just about machines, it was about stories, about giving people back what mattered to them. And in that quiet, greasy workshop, I felt the first real stirrings of purpose. Maybe this wasn't just a job. Maybe this was training, shaping me for something larger. Still, I didn't dare tell Mr. Tuan about my growing ambition. He wasn't the type to cheerlead. He'd probably laugh, tell me to focus on not electrocuting myself, and go back to his radio. So I kept it to myself, a secret ember glowing under the surface. Each night, as I lay on my mattress listening to the faint buzz of streetlights outside, I whispered to myself, one day, not today, not tomorrow, but one day. And though I didn't know it then, those whispered words would eventually carry me further than I ever imagined. One day had become my secret mantra, but eventually even whispers demand action. The ember of ambition inside me started flaring, and I realized I couldn't just keep patching up radios and fans forever. Don't get me wrong, I respected the work. Machines have personalities, quirks almost like people. But my gut told me I needed to take a risk. It started with a simple idea. What if I fixed things outside the shop, on my own time, for my own customers? I didn't have money for a storefront, but I had 2 hands, a growing reputation, and this still makes me laugh: a bicycle with a basket strapped to the front. So I made a decision. After work at the shop, I'd pedal through neighborhoods offering to repair small appliances on the spot. The first night I tried it, I felt ridiculous. Riding that squeaky bike with a cardboard sign taped to the basket, I must have looked like a rejected circus act. But to my surprise, a man flagged me down before I even lost my nerve. His rice cooker was dead. He handed it over with the kind of skepticism you usually reserve for street magicians. I tinkered with it right there under a flickering street lamp, sweat dripping, hands trembling, and, by some miracle, it worked. When steam hissed out, his eyebrows shot up. He actually clapped. He paid me the equivalent of a few bowls of noodles, more than I earned in half a day sweeping floors. I pedaled home that night with my heart racing, the money folded into my pocket like proof that my dream wasn't totally absurd. Over the next weeks, I expanded. Word spread in whispers. There's a guy who can fix your blender cheap. Just look for the bicycle. I fixed fans, irons, kettles, even a television someone insisted could never work again. My back ached, my hands blistered, but every repair felt like a brick laid in a foundation I was building. Of course, it wasn't smooth sailing. One evening, I tried repairing a neighbor's lamp, only for it to explode in a puff of smoke the second we plugged it in. We both stood there coughing, and she said, "Maybe it's modern art now." We laughed until our sides hurt. Some historians might argue that early entrepreneurs succeed through skill, others through luck. Personally, I'd say they survive through laughter, because sometimes that's the only thing keeping you from giving up. The bicycle business didn't make me rich, but it taught me something priceless. People trusted me, not because of Mr. Tuan's workshop, Not because of family connections, because of me. They saw I cared, that I tried, that I wouldn't give up on a machine until my fingers cramped. That trust was the seed of something bigger. At night, when I returned to my mattress in the workshop, I counted my earnings. Tiny piles of cash, ragged and wrinkled, but they glowed with possibility. I started imagining, what if I had my own space, a shop with my name on it, customers walking in because they knew they'd be treated fairly. I didn't dare tell my siblings in my daydreams. The thought of their sneers still burned too fresh. They'd probably call me delusional, but under the hum of the streetlight outside the workshop window, I allowed myself to imagine their faces someday seeing me. Not as the burden they'd kicked out, but as someone who built something from nothing. The broken hairdryer was still my nightly challenge. I'd fiddle with it after long days, trying to coax life back into its stubborn circuit. It never hummed, never glowed, but I refused to toss it away. To me, it wasn't just a useless appliance, it was a reminder, proof that even broken things deserve patience. Proof that one day I'd prove my family wrong the same way I was determined to resurrect that machine. And so, between the grease, the laughter, the failures, and the bicycle rides, the first spark of business had been lit. I didn't know how long it would take to catch fire, but for the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was building. The bicycle eventually couldn't keep up with the growing requests. People started waiting for me outside Mr. Tuan's workshop, waving to catch my attention before I even set off on my evening rounds. I remember one woman holding up a broken rice cooker like it was a sacred offering, yelling, "Fix this and I'll tell all my neighbors you're the real deal." That kind of advertisement, you can't buy it, comes wrapped in gossip and enthusiasm, but expansion brings problems too. My pockets jingled with coins, but not enough for anything serious. I still had no official business license, no proper space, and my tools looked like they belonged in a survival kit, not a workshop. I'd sometimes catch myself laughing at the absurdity of it. I was a repairman operating out of a bike basket. It was like trying to run a bank out of a lemonade stand. Then came my first real turning point. A small cafe owner found me through word of mouth and begged me to fix his espresso machine. I'd never touched one before, but saying no wasn't in my vocabulary anymore, so I studied it like a surgeon facing a patient on the brink. Wires, pipes, switches, it was a puzzle wrapped in caffeine fumes. After 2 hours, just when he looked ready to throw me out, the machine hissed back to life. Coffee gushed like a miracle. He hugged me right there, arms covered in flour, tears in his eyes. And just like that, I became the guy who saved the cafe. That job gave me something more valuable than money, confidence, and confidence is contagious. Soon I was fixing not just home appliances, but small business equipment, refrigerators, mixers, even an ancient cash register. Each machine had its own stubborn personality, like customers at a DMV. Some historians still debate whether small entrepreneurs rise because of technical skill or sheer stubbornness. I can tell you from experience it's stubbornness every time. By then, my office had evolved from the bike basket to a rickety wooden cart I dragged behind me. It looked like a traveling magic show. Kids in the neighborhood called me the wizard with screws, and honestly, I leaned into it. Why not? Every repair felt a little like magic anyway. Of course, not everything went smoothly. One night, a man demanded I fix his fan, swearing it just stopped working. When I opened it up, I found half a sock stuck inside. I looked at him, sock dangling from my pliers, and said, "I think I've located the problem." He turned bright red and muttered something about laundry mishaps. We both laughed so hard the neighbor's dog started barking. Those small absurdities made the grind bearable. But underneath, a shift was happening inside me. I wasn't just fixing machines, I was fixing my own sense of worth. Every satisfied customer patched up a part of me my family had torn apart. Every coin earned was a quiet rebellion, proof that their judgment hadn't broken me. Still, at night, doubt lingered. My siblings lived in comfort, enjoying the inheritance they'd shoved me out of. Meanwhile, I dragged carts through uneven streets, grease staining my shirt, sweat sticking my hair to my forehead. Some nights I lay awake, wondering if I'd ever really rise above this hustle. When I stumbled upon a newspaper article about the rise of small startups in the city. The headline practically screamed at me, from stalls to enterprises. Local dreamers build big. Something in those words lit me up. Why not me? Why not take my ragged cart and turn it into something bigger, something permanent? I started saving with ruthless discipline. No snacks, no unnecessary purchases. Every coin went into a tin I buried beneath my thin mattress. Each clink of metal was like a drumbeat toward a future no one believed in but me. And then, one morning, as I tightened the screws on a battered kettle, I realized I wasn't scared anymore. I was ready to risk what little I had, ready to step out from under the shadow of pity and laughter. My hands, rough and scarred, trembled not from fear but from excitement. The cart, the bike, the late night stay had been training wheels. Now, I wanted a real workshop, a place where I could hang a sign with my name, where customers didn't find me by chasing rumor, but by walking through a door that said, "This is mine." I didn't know then, of course, that chasing this dream would eventually lead to the moment where those same siblings who had tossed me aside would knock on my door. But as I tucked away the last coin of that day into my hidden tin, I felt something new blooming inside me. Certainty, the kind that doesn't shout but whispers, steady and calm, "You're on the right path." The day I finally counted the coins in my tin, my hands shook. I poured them onto the mattress, the metal clinking like rainfall. The pile wasn't enormous by any means, but to me, it looked like a mountain. Months of sweat, grease, and late nights had turned into something tangible, enough to rent a tiny space. The shop I found was nothing glamorous, just a narrow, dusty corner of an old building. The walls were cracked, the floor uneven, and there was a smell of damp wood that clung to everything. But when I stepped inside, my heart raced. To anyone else, it was a shabby box. To me, it was the first place in the world I could claim as mine. I painted the walls with my own hands, scrubbed the grime until my knuckles burned, and hung a crooked sign outside: repairs and fixes, reliable service. The letters weren't perfectly aligned, but they felt like a declaration. My name wasn't T on the sign, yet I didn't have the courage, but I promised myself one day it would be. The first week was terrifying. I sat at my makeshift counter, staring at the empty doorway, waiting for anyone to walk in. I remember tapping my fingers on the table, humming nervously, pretending to look busy whenever footsteps echoed outside. More often than not, they passed right by. Then, one afternoon, an old man shuffled in with a radio cradled in his arms. He placed it gently on the counter and asked, "Do you think you can bring this back to life?" His voice carried both hope and doubt. My chest tightened. I nodded. Hours later, when the radio crackled and music poured out, he cried. Actual tears streamed down his face as he whispered, "You've given me back my evenings." That moment, seeing him sway softly to the tune, eyes shining, was worth more than all the coins I'd saved. That was the true beginning. Customers started to trickle in after that, some curious, some skeptical. Many had heard of the bike repair guy and wanted to see if the rumors were true. I worked tirelessly, fixing everything that came through my door: televisions, fans, rice cookers, even sewing machines. My hands moved with practiced confidence now, my nerves replaced with quiet determination. The shop grew busier, and with it, so did I. I stopped feeling like an imposter. The cracked walls became less of an embarrassment and more of a badge of resilience. People didn't care about the uneven floor or the peeling paint. They cared that I never gave up on their machines, that I treated every item like it mattered. But success has a way of drawing shadows. One evening, as I closed up, I spotted a familiar figure across the street: my older brother. He didn't see me, or maybe he pretended not to. For a moment, I froze, memories flooding back. The accusations, the day they cast me out, the way his laughter had sliced through me. I ducked inside, heart pounding, and sat in the dark for a long time. Part of me wanted to storm across the street and yell, Look at what I've built." But another part whispered, "Not yet. Let them see when the time is right. Let the truth be undeniable." And so I waited. Business grew steadily. Some days I worked until my eyes blurred, repairing machines by the light of a single bulb. Other days, I battled setbacks, customers who never paid, repairs that failed, moments when exhaustion made me question everything. But even in the lowest moments, I reminded myself of the radio, of the tears in the old man's eyes, of the life I was rebuilding from nothing. And always, in the corner of my workbench, sat the broken hairdryer, still lifeless, still mocking me, yet I refused to throw it away. To anyone else, it was junk. To me, it was a promise. A reminder that even the most stubborn, broken things could have value, if only given enough time. One evening, while sweeping the floor, I caught myself smiling, not because everything was perfect, but because I realized I had done something extraordinary, had survived being cast out, laughed at, and pushed down, and not only survived, but created a place where people now came to me, not out of pity, but out of trust. The workshop smelled of dust and oil, the paint still peeled in places, but to me, it smelled like freedom. I didn't know it yet, but this tiny, crooked shop was the seed of an empire, and soon enough, the same family that had abandoned me would walk through my door not as rulers of my fate, but as customers in need. The months rolled into years, and with each passing day my little shop grew stronger roots. What began as a dusty corner with uneven floors turned into a place buzzing with life. Customers no longer stumbled in by chance, they sought me out, sometimes traveling across districts just to leave their broken machines in my care. The walls, once bare and cracked, now carried shelves stacked with neatly organized tools and spare parts. A second-hand fan hummed in the corner to fight off the sweltering heat, and the smell of solder and machine oil became my shop's signature fragrance. It wasn't glamorous, but it was alive. And more importantly, it was mine. The turning point came when a local cafe owner walked in with an espresso machine that had stopped working. He looked desperate, muttering that without it, his business was on the verge of shutting down. I had never seen an espresso machine up close before, but something inside me whispered, "Say yes, figure it out." So I did. For 2 days, I practically lived beside that machine. I dismantled it piece by piece, sketched diagrams, tested connections, and read every scrap of manual the cafe owner could find. My hands blistered, my back ached, but eventually, steam hissed out of the nozzle again, and the machine gurgled back to life. When the first cup of coffee poured, the cafe owner hugged me like I had just rescued his child. He didn't just pay me, he told everyone in his neighborhood about me. Suddenly, my name spread beyond the street, beyond the block. That one repair changed everything. More businesses began knocking on my door, restaurants, shops, even schools with broken equipment. What had been a humble repair corner was transforming into something bigger. But with growth came challenges. Some customers doubted me, seeing only the shabby shop and the young man behind the counter. "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" they'd ask, eyebrows raised. Every time, their doubts stung. Yet every successful repair turned that sting into fuel. Slowly, skepticism shifted into respect. Still, the ghosts of my family lingered in my mind. Each time I tightened a screw or soldered a wire, I imagined their laughter, their dismissal, the way they had called me useless. I didn't burn with anger anymore, it had cooled into something sharper, resolve. One day, they would walk into my shop, not out of pity, but because they needed me. And fate, with its strange sense of humor, decided to test me sooner than I expected. It was a hot afternoon when I looked up from my workbench and froze. Standing at the doorway was my sister. She hadn't changed much, still carried herself with the same pride, the same sharp gaze. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was thick with years of silence. Finally, she stepped in, clutching a broken rice cooker. Her voice was steady, almost casual, as she said, "Someone told me you might be able to fix this." I stared at her, my mind racing. This was the same sister who had once told me I was dead weight, who had stood silent when I was thrown out, and now, here she was, standing in my shop, holding out something broken, asking me to mend it. I wanted to laugh, to shout, to throw every bitter word back at her, but I didn't. Instead, I took the rice cooker gently from her hands and said, "Leave it here. I'll call you when it's ready." Her eyes flickered surprise, maybe even guilt, but she said nothing. She simply nodded and left. That night, I sat with the rice cooker long after closing. It wasn't about the machine. It was about what it represented. For the first time, the power had shifted. I was no longer the boy cast aside. I was the one they needed. When I returned the rice cooker, repaired and humming, she paid without a word. But before leaving, she paused at the door, looked back, and whispered, "You've done well." It wasn't an apology, not even close. But it was the first crack in the wall my family had built between us. And cracks, as I had learned from countless repairs, are where the light begins to seep through. The broken hairdryer still sat on my bench, untouched. I glanced at it that night and smiled. Soon, I whispered to it. Soon we'll show them all. The encounter with my sister lingered in my mind like the faint smell of solder on my fingertips. For years I had imagined what it would feel like to stand face to face with one of them again. Would I explode in rage? Would I break down and cry? Instead, the moment had passed with an odd calmness. She came, she left, and I repaired her rice cooker, as if she were just another customer. But deep inside, something shifted. The line that had once divided us so clearly, the powerful versus the powerless, was blurring. Word about my shop spread even faster after that. It wasn't just my skills that drew people in, it was the stories customers carried with them. A woman swore her blender had been cursed after she tried to mix sticky rice in it. A man brought me a wall clock that hadn't ticked since his wedding day 20 years ago, claiming his marriage depended on me fixing it. Spoiler alert, the clock worked again, but I can't guarantee the marriage did. Each day, I found myself stitching together lives in small ways, not just wires and gears. And while I joked about it, I knew there was a strange kind of dignity in this work. To repair something broken and return it whole, it was like sending people away lighter than they came. But success came with whispers. My family, it seemed, couldn't ignore me forever. I began to hear murmurs through old acquaintances, customers who dropped hints. "Your brothers aren't doing so well," someone would say casually as I handed them their repaired fan. "I heard their business isn't what it used to be," another mentioned, their tones sly. I brushed it off. Or at least, I pretended to. But in the quiet nights, when the fan hummed in the corner and the shop smelled faintly of metal and oil, I thought about it. The empire they had flaunted, the wealth that had made them sneer at MIT, was cracking. One evening, as rain pattered against the shop's metal roof, I found myself staring at that old broken hairdryer again. The one they had mocked me for keeping. Dust clung to its cord, and its once bright plastic had yellowed with time. Yet I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. It was a reminder, a relic of that night I was cast out. And maybe, just maybe, it was a symbol of how far I had come. The universe, with its cruel sense of timing, delivered another twist not long after. I was closing up shop when a sleek black car pulled up in front. I knew instantly it didn't belong on my street. The door opened, and out stepped my eldest brother. His suit was still sharp, but his face carried lines I didn't remember. Stress, maybe, or regret. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. He strode into the shop, his shoes clicking against the worn floor, and looked around with a faint sneer, though I could tell it was more habit than conviction. "You've done well for yourself," he said, his voice heavy. I leaned against my workbench, arms crossed. Surprised, he didn't answer. Instead, he placed a briefcase on the counter, clicked it open, and slid a stack of documents toward me. "We need your help." Those 4 words. I had imagined them 1,000 times, rehearsed witty comebacks in the shower, thought about the exact smirk I'd wear, but in the moment, I simply blinked. "Help? With what?" "Our company," he hesitated, a crack in his usual commanding tone. "It's in trouble. Serious trouble. We need someone with your skills." I almost laughed. Skills. They had mocked those very skills, had told me tinkering with wires and motors was beneath me. And now, suddenly, those same skills were what stood between them and ruin. "Let me get this straight," I said, my voice calm but sharp. "You threw me out, left me on the street, mocked me for years, and now you want me to fix your mess." He flinched but didn't deny it. Yet, there was a silence so heavy I could hear the rain outside dripping into the gutter. My heart pounded, not with anger but with something colder. Power for the first time. I wasn't the one begging, there were. I didn't answer him right away. Instead, I turned, picked up the old hairdryer from the bench, and held it up. Do you remember this? He frowned, squinting. It's some junk, isn't it? I smiled. This was the first thing I ever fixed. The thing you all laughed at. And yet here we are, you standing in my shop asking for help. Life's funny, isn't it? His jaw tightened. Will you help us or not? I set the hairdryer down gently, almost reverently. Then I looked at him and said, maybe, but on my terms. That night, as the rain kept falling and my brother drove away, I knew the tide had turned. I wasn't just the black sheep anymore. I was the one holding the lifeline. And let me tell you, nothing puts you to sleep faster than realizing karma has finally decided to clock in for work. The night after my brother's visit, I barely slept. Not because I was nervous, but because I kept replaying the look on his face. It wasn't just desperation, it was humiliation. For years, he had looked at me as if I were beneath him, a shadow not even worth acknowledging. Now he had walked into my little repair shop, rain dripping from his expensive suit, and placed his pride on my counter like a broken appliance waiting to be fixed. But pride doesn't mend with a screwdriver. In the morning, I went about business as usual. Customers streamed in, each with their stories and their gadgets. A young student brought me a laptop that wouldn't charge. An old man came with a radio that only picked up static. A mother begged me to fix her washing machine motor so she could stop washing clothes by hand. It was a normal day, filled with small repairs. But my mind lingered on the bigger one, waiting for me, the repair of a family empire that had once thrown me away like scrap metal. I didn't rush to give them an answer. Let them sweat. Let them feel what it was like to wait, powerless, for someone else's decision. For once, I had the leverage, and I wasn't about to squander it. A week later, the call came. This time, it was my second brother. His voice carried none of the arrogance I remembered. Please, he said, we can't manage without you. If you don't step in, the whole company will collapse. I leaned back in my chair, the phone warm against my ear, and allowed myself a moment of silence before replying. You should have thought about that 15 years ago. There was a sharp inhale on the other end, followed by a long pause. Then, quietly, you're right. But we're asking now. And that was the difference. For years, I had been invisible. Now they had no choice but to see me. Still, I wasn't going to walk into their crumbling castle for free. If I was going to help, it would be on my conditions, so I laid them out. Full authority over the restructuring, majority stake and ownership, and complete transparency. If they wanted me, they had to hand me the keys. When I told them this, the silence was deafening. I could almost hear their pride shattering like glass. Days passed before they gave me their answer. I spent that time polishing my shop, fixing every broken tool, and even repairing the flickering neon sign outside. The world doesn't stop just because an empire is falling. It hums along, steady as a motor when cared for. Finally, a black car returned. This time, all three of my siblings stepped out. They looked different, thinner, wearier, stripped of the arrogance that had once clung to them like expensive cologne. They came into my shop, their eyes darting around at the cramped space that had become my sanctuary. My eldest brother was the one to speak. We accept your terms. The words tasted sweet, even though I wasn't the one saying them. I nodded slowly, as if weighing their worth, though inside, my heart thundered. 15 years of exile, of hunger, of humiliation, and here they were, offering me the crown of the kingdom they had once denied me entry to. I'll help, I said finally, my voice steady. But understand this. From now on, I am not your little brother who sleeps on concrete floors. I am the one who decides whether you sink or swim. Their silence was agreement enough. That night, after they left, I sat alone in the shop. The tools on my bench glinted under the dim light, and for the first time I felt the weight of everything shift. I wasn't just a repairman anymore. I was about to step into the very halls that had once cast me out, not as a beggar, but as the master. And yet, deep down, I couldn't help but wonder, was this victory? Or was it simply another repair job? One bigger, messier, and far more fragile than any appliance I had ever fixed. Time would tell. For now, though, I allowed myself to smile. because nothing lulls you into peaceful sleep quite like the realization that tomorrow you'll be walking back into the world that once rejected you, not with empty hands, but with the power to rewrite the story. The first day I stepped back into the company headquarters, I swear the walls themselves seemed to stare at me. The building hadn't changed much, still towering, still draped in glass and steel that screamed of power and money, but for me, it was like walking into the belly of a beast that had once spit me out. I remembered being chased away from this place 15 years ago, like some stray dog, not fit to linger near the gates. Now I was walking through the front door, and the security guards nodded as if I belonged. That nod alone was a small victory. Inside the lobby gleamed with marble floors, so polished I could see my reflection. Back then, I couldn't even afford shoes without holes. Now I wore a suit tailored just for me. It wasn't expensive for the sake of vanity, but because I wanted to look like someone who was impossible to dismiss. You know how people say dress for the job you want? Well, I was dressing for the empire I was about to take over. The employees I passed looked at me curiously. Some whispered, some straightened their posture, and others avoided eye contact altogether. Office gossip spreads faster than a printer jam, and I knew my story had already been circulating like wildfire. The outcast brother who had returned, not as a ghost, but as the man tasked with saving them. In the boardroom, my siblings sat waiting. The long mahogany table stretched like a battlefield, polished to a shine that reflected their uneasy faces. They didn't meet my eyes at first. Perhaps they were still adjusting to the fact that I wasn't kneeling at their mercy. I placed my briefcase on the table, letting the sound echo across the room. "Shall we begin?" I asked, calm but firm. The meeting was brutal. Years of mismanagement had bled the company dry. Investments had gone sour, projects stalled, debts piled high. My siblings tried to explain, to justify, to point fingers at each other, but I cut through the noise like a surgeon with a scalpel. "The problem isn't the market," I said. "It's you. You were too busy fighting over crowns to notice the foundation cracking beneath your feet." The silence that followed was heavy. For once they didn't argue. They knew I was right. And so, I laid out my plan. Sell off vanity projects, restructure the bloated management, cut unnecessary spending, focus on core strengths, rebuild trust with clients, and most importantly, rebuild the company culture from the ground up. It wasn't glamorous, but it was survival. Some employees resisted, of course. People don't like change, especially when it threatens their comfort. But I had been uncomfortable my entire life, sleeping under bridges, eating scraps, being looked at as worthless. Discomfort was my training ground. Compared to that, corporate pushback was just background noise. I walked the floors, not just the boardroom. I shook hands with engineers, janitors, clerks. I listened to their complaints, their ideas, their fears. And the strangest thing happened, they began to trust me. Maybe because I didn't look at them as pawns. Maybe because, unlike my siblings, I knew what it meant to be invisible. At night, I would return to my tiny repair shop, sit among the familiar smell of solder and oil, and remind myself of who I was. I wasn't about to let the shiny offices and fancy suits erase that. If anything, the shop grounded me. It reminded me that while I was now fixing an empire, I was still just a man with calloused hands and the patience to repair what others threw away. One evening, as I was tightening a bolt on a blender someone had brought in, I laughed to myself. It struck me as almost comical. By day, I was untangling millions in debt. By night, I was untangling wires in someone's kitchen appliance. Both required focus, steady hands, and the belief that nothing was truly beyond repair. And you know, historians might still argue whether survival is a greater achievement than success. But in that moment, I felt both. As the weeks went by, the company slowly stabilized. Clients who had been slipping away began to return, cautiously at first. Employees stopped whispering fearfully in the hallways and started working with purpose again. My siblings, still tense, still stubborn, had little choice but to follow my lead. One night, while standing in my office overlooking the city, I realized something. This was no longer about revenge. Sure, seeing them bow their heads was satisfying, but I had moved past that. I wasn't here to gloat, I was here to build. But make no mistake, I hadn't forgotten, and I never would. The deeper I went into the company, the more ghosts I uncovered. Not the kind that rattle chains in the night, but the kind that drain bank accounts and morale with equal force. There were contracts signed in desperation, loans taken at outrageous interest, and partnerships that looked more like traps than opportunities. Every file I opened seemed to whisper, "This is where it should have ended," but I refused to let it end. I attacked the problems piece by piece. Some days felt like surgery, delicate, precise. One wrong cut and the patient would bleed out. Other days felt like demolition, tearing down entire divisions that had rotted from the inside. Every move had consequences, every decision made someone unhappy. But as I learned a long time ago, survival isn't about making everyone comfortable. It's about choosing which discomfort you can live with. My siblings didn't make things easier. They resented me, of course. They sat in meetings with stiff jaws and clenched fists, their silence dripping with bitterness. I could almost hear their thoughts. How dare he, the one we cast out, tell us what to do? Yet, underneath that resentment, I saw something else: fear. They feared the company's collapse. Yes, but they also feared me, because I was no longer the boy they could push around. I was the man holding the reins, and they hated needing me. Sometimes, in quieter moments, I'd catch them watching me with conflicted eyes. Maybe they wondered if I'd save them just to humiliate them later. Maybe they wondered if I'd abandon them the way they once abandoned me. The irony wasn't lost on me. Outside the walls of the company, word spread. Clients, investors, even competitors began whispering my name. They called me the repairman, the one who could take something broken and breathe life back into it. Funny, isn't it? The skill I learned with rusted microwaves and flickering lamps had become my reputation in the world of business. But reputation comes with shadows. Old acquaintances, distant relatives, even people who once sneered at me started showing up again, suddenly eager to reconnect. Invitations poured in, dinners, galas, ceremonies. People wanted to be seen beside me, to claim some piece of my rising fortune. I accepted some, refused most, not out of arrogance, but because I remembered what it felt like to be invisible. I wasn't about to let shallow attention distract me from the work that mattered. At night, though, when the lights of the city flickered outside my window, doubts still crept in. Was I becoming like them, hungry for power, desperate for recognition? I'd sit with that question until the memory of my old mattress on the workshop floor returned, grounding me. I promised myself I'd never forget the smell of dust and solder, the way a repaired toaster could feel like a miracle. One weekend I returned to that same street where I once bought a single roll of bread, because it was all I could afford. This time, I walked into the bakery and bought a dozen, handing them out to the kids playing outside. Their faces lit up, their laughter ringing through the air. And I thought, this is what wealth should feel like: not crowns, not titles, but bread shared freely. The company continued to stabilize. Slowly, steadily, it clawed back from the edge of collapse. The numbers shifted from red to black, and for the first time in years, hope crept back into the halls. Employees began smiling again, greeting me with genuine respect instead of cautious curiosity. And my siblings, they grew quieter. The arrogance that once dripped from every word was gone, replaced by a reluctant acknowledgement. They didn't thank me, not directly. Gratitude has never been their language, but the silence, the way they no longer fought my every decision, was its own kind of surrender. Still, I knew this was not the end. Repairing the company was only one chapter. The real test was yet to come, because survival, as I had learned, is only the beginning, and I was no longer content with just surviving. The turning point came on a rainy afternoon, the kind of storm that makes the city hum like an old refrigerator. I sat in the boardroom with my siblings, the sound of thunder rolling in as if nature itself had decided to be our soundtrack. The numbers were in solid, clean, even promising. The company had not only been saved, it was climbing again. I leaned back in my chair, watching the tension ripple across their faces. They looked like children waiting for punishment, though none of them would ever admit it. Finally, one of them broke the silence. My eldest brother, always the loudest when mocking me years ago, cleared his throat and said, We couldn't have done this without you. It wasn't much, but it was everything. The irony stung though. 15 years earlier, they had decided I was the burden dragging everyone down. They had thrown me out, stripped me of the little dignity I had left, convinced I would vanish into nothingness. Now here they were, sitting across from me, acknowledging a truth they couldn't swallow, but couldn't spit out either. I was the one who saved them, and I didn't gloat, not because I wasn't tempted, I was, trust me, but because I realized the victory wasn't in their words. The victory was in the fact that I didn't need them anymore. I had built my own life, my own fortune, my own respect. Their approval was no longer the currency I chased. Later that night, walking through the quiet streets, I thought about what came next. The company was stable, but stability wasn't my endgame. I wanted more than balance sheets and boardrooms. I wanted to create, to expand, to shape something in my own image rather than patching up what others had broken. So I started planning new ventures, new risks, a future not bound by the mistakes of my family. And for the first time, I felt a strange, liberating kind of peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because I no longer feared imperfection. I had fallen before, lived in dust and shadows, and clawed my way back. What could possibly scare me now? People sometimes ask me what forgiveness looks like in this story. Do I forgive my siblings for what they did? The answer is complicated. Forgiveness, I think, is less about saying, it's okay, and more about saying, you no longer have power over me. I don't carry their cruelty with me anymore. I carry the lessons it carved into my skin. That, in itself, feels like forgiveness enough. And yes, I even laugh about it now, because life, in its absurd way, gave me the best punchline. The very family who once tossed me aside now benefits from the empire I rebuilt. It's almost sitcom material, except with fewer laugh tracks and more paperwork. In the end, what I learned is this: survival is never just about food or money. It's about holding on to a sliver of self-worth when the world tells you you're worthless. It's about repairing not only broken machines and failing companies, but also the fractured belief that you deserve a place in the story. So if you're listening to this, maybe in bed with the lights low, wondering if you'll ever get your moment, let me tell you, your moment is already building itself quietly in the shadows. Don't rush it. Don't doubt it. Even the cracks in your walls can let the light in, because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't revenge at all. It's thriving so completely that the past can only watch, stunned, as you rise. And now, as we settle into the close of this long, winding tale, let's let the edges soften a little. Imagine the storm outside fading into a gentle drizzle, the thunder dissolving into distant murmurs. The air feels cooler now, the weight of conflict lifting, leaving only a quiet calm. You've walked beside me through the dust, the betrayal, the long nights of repair, and the bright mornings of rebuilding. And maybe, in your own way, you've seen pieces of yourself tucked between these words, the doubts, the resilience, the stubborn pulse of hope that refuses to die. As you rest here now, let each breath remind you of that same resilience. The rise and fall of your chest is its own rhythm, steady, patient, unshaken. Let the images fade, the boardrooms, the streets, the old bakery, and replace them with something softer. A candle flickering in the dark, a window half open with the curtain swaying gently, a distant hum of life outside, soothing and familiar. The story lingers like a fading echo, but your body knows it is time to rest. There is no need to solve anything right now. No need to win or prove or repair, just the gentle hum of the fan, the quiet ticking of time, and the comfort of knowing you are here, safe, with your own story unfolding in its own way. Let the last words drift like a whisper. You've come far enough tonight. Let go, rest easy, sleep well.